My name is Stacey Ellis. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my place in my family has felt like standing in someone else's shadow. My brother was always the favourite, the golden child, an accomplished lawyer who in their eyes could never mess up. Meanwhile, I was the one quietly holding everything together, putting my own dreams on pause, bending myself into whatever shape I thought would finally earn their approval. No matter how much I gave, it was never enough for them. They lit up whenever my brother walked into the room, smiling wide and clapping him on the back like he'd already won at life. When it came to me, though, I got icy looks and words sharp enough to leave marks. "Why can't you be more like him?" they'd ask, their voices slicing straight through me without a second thought. I took it all in and kept my mouth shut, convincing myself that if I stayed patient long enough, they'd eventually see who I really was. Then my brother announced his wedding, and suddenly everything revolved around making his big day flawless. I was put in charge of organising it all, every detail, every decision, every problem, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. I honestly believed that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment they'd finally notice me. I couldn't have been more wrong. The night before the wedding, we were all sitting around the dinner table when my brother started demanding even more. Custom luxury bands, imported flowers, expensive upgrades that were way beyond what I could pull together. I told him no. That single word changed everything. My parents snapped. What they said hit me harder than anything I'd ever heard from them before. "The best gift you can give your brother," they said coldly, "is disappearing from this family for good." The room fell dead silent. My chest tightened, but I didn't beg or argue. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out without looking back. When the door shut behind me, it felt final, like the end of a sentence that had been dragging on for years. The wedding day arrived anyway. Everything looked perfect, right up until it all fell apart in a heartbeat. If you were in my place, would you stick around to watch it happen, or would you walk away for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear what you'd do. Years before all of that, I was working as a freelance marketer with big plans for my future. I'd just landed a massive opportunity, a $40,000 contract with a major supermarket chain to overhaul their regional advertising. That deal was my way out, my shot at independence, and a chance to build my reputation in a brutal industry. Then my family's grocery store in Erie, Pennsylvania, hit rock bottom. Bills stacked up fast, suppliers stopped returning calls, and my parents were drowning in debt. My mum called me one night, her voice shaking as she begged for help. Even my dad, usually calm and unreadable, admitted they were close to losing everything. I couldn't stand the thought of that. So I walked away from my contract. I called the supermarket's representative, cancelled the deal, and redirected every ounce of my energy into saving our store. I built a marketing strategy from the ground up, local radio ads, flyers stuffed into mailboxes, and even early social media posts on clunky platforms that barely worked. I negotiated with vendors, charmed customers, cut costs wherever I could, and kept pushing forward. Within a few months, foot traffic doubled, revenue climbed. The worst of the debts were finally paid off. I stayed up late into the night tweaking slogans and designing posters, telling myself this would be the moment they finally saw me for who I was. They didn't. One evening, my parents, Joyce Reed and Jeffrey Reed, called a family meeting. I went in expecting at least a thank you, maybe some acknowledgement for pulling us back from the edge. Instead, they handed control of the store to my brother, Brent Ellis. "He's a lawyer," my mum said proudly, her face glowing. "He's got the right kind of mind for this." Brent, who hadn't lifted a finger and had spent those months buried in his law firm, was suddenly in charge. My dad nodded along, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's for the best," he muttered. I stood there frozen, my chest tight, barely able to breathe. Brent smirked, straightened his tie, and started talking about changes he wanted to make to my campaign. "You did okay, Stacey," he said, his tone soaked in arrogance. Okay, I'd saved their business, I'd sacrificed my future. And somehow, I was still just the backup, the filler, the safety net. My mum kept praising Brent's so-called vision, acting like my work barely mattered. My dad didn't even look up from his coffee. I wanted to scream, to demand that they admit what I'd done, but I didn't. I swallowed the pain, forced a smile, and kept going. I stayed late at the store, reorganizing shelves, refreshing ads, doing anything I could to stay useful. I kept telling myself that if I worked harder, proved myself more, they'd finally recognize my worth. Maybe one night at dinner, my mum would say, "You saved us." Maybe my dad would clap my shoulder instead of Brent's. My best friend since college, Nathan Todd, saw the truth long before I did. We'd meet at a diner, and he'd shake his head while I told him everything. "They're blind, Stacey," he said once, sipping his coffee. "You're destroying yourself for people who don't care." I brushed it off, but his words stuck with me. Still, I couldn't stop hoping. I couldn't walk away. I stayed, pouring myself into their world, convinced that one day they'd finally value me. The store kept thriving because of my campaign. The aisles stayed packed, the registers never stopped humming, and suppliers came back like nothing had ever gone wrong. But every time I walked in, I saw Brent's name on the manager's office door. My parents would call him in to talk strategy while I restocked shelves. "Good job," my mum said once, barely paying attention, like I'd just wiped down a counter instead of saving the business. Brent would swing by, toss out ideas I'd already put in place, and they'd nod like he'd invented them himself. I kept waiting for a real thank you. I kept telling myself maybe next time. Maybe if I gave more, worked harder, they'd finally see me as someone who mattered. More than anything, I wanted to be seen as more than the lesser child. So I kept pushing forward, ignoring the tight ache in my chest, holding on to the hope that one day they'd finally say I was enough. A few months later, I was buried deep in planning my brother's wedding. Brent was getting married to his fiancée, Lindsay Newman, and once again my parents handed everything to me. They didn't ask if I had the time or the money, they just assumed I'd make it happen. At the time, I was freelancing as a marketer and barely scraping by, but I still dipped into my savings, $10,000 of it, to cover deposits for the venue, vendors, and everything else. I wanted the wedding to be perfect, not for Brent, but because I thought it might finally prove I could do something they truly valued. I spent weeks glued to my phone, calling caterers, florists, and photographers, locking down every last detail. I chose a practical menu: roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and summer salads, something nice but within budget. I met vendors all over Erie, negotiating prices, double-checking contracts, and making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. But Brent wasn't interested in nice. He wanted a show. One morning over breakfast, he scrolled through his phone and announced, "Get a string quartet from Pittsburgh." Then he added, "And those rare orchids from overseas, Lindsay saw them in a magazine." I explained that the budget was already stretched thin and that my savings were nearly gone. He rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. "You're always cutting corners, Stacey. Just make it happen." My mum, Joyce, chimed in without hesitation, sipping her coffee. "He's right. This is his day. Don't mess it up." My dad, Jeffrey, didn't even look up from his newspaper. He just nodded along. Their words stung, but I kept moving forward, telling myself that if the wedding turned out flawless, maybe I'd finally earn their respect. I stayed up late every night emailing vendors and reshuffling plans. I found a local band willing to play for less and swapped out imported flowers for standard roses. Every decision was carefully calculated, trying to balance Brent's impossible demands with reality. Still, it was never enough. One afternoon, Brent called and insisted on hiring a celebrity DJ from Cleveland. "It's only a few thousand more," he said, like that kind of money meant nothing. I reminded him I was already paying for half the wedding myself. "Figure it out," he snapped, and then he hung up. Joyce overheard and shook her head at me. "Why can't you just do what he wants?" she said. Jeffrey glanced up briefly and muttered, "Don't ruin this for him." I felt invisible. I was coordinating every detail, sacrificing my own work and income to make their vision happen, and all they did was criticize. At a family lunch, Joyce pointed out a typo in the invitation draft I'd brought. "Careless," she said, tossing it aside. Brent smirked. Typical Stacey. I wanted to snap back and tell them how much I was carrying, how close I was to breaking, but I didn't. I bit my tongue and went back to adjusting seating charts and confirming deliveries, hoping they'd notice the effort behind it all. Nathan noticed, though. One evening, we met at a coffee shop in Erie, and I unloaded everything: Brent's constant demands, the pressure, the money stress. "Now he wants a custom ice sculpture," I said, exhausted. Nathan leaned forward, his voice firm. Stacy, you're bending over backward for people who don't appreciate you. You need to stand up for yourself. I shrugged, stirring my coffee. If I pull this off, maybe they'll finally see me. He shook his head. They won't, and you're worth more than their approval. Even so, I couldn't stop. I kept calling the venue daily, making sure the linens were right and the cake was ordered. I even paid extra to secure a backup generator, just in case. My savings kept shrinking, but I told myself it would all be worth it. Maybe Joyce would smile at me for once. Maybe Jeffrey would say something other than, "Don't ruin it." I poured everything I had into that wedding, convinced it was my moment to shine. But Brent's demands kept escalating. At one point, he texted me a link to a luxury catering service and insisted on caviar appetizers. I called him immediately and explained it would completely blow the budget. "You're embarrassing me," he said coldly. Joyce overheard when I stopped by the house later and sighed. "Just do what he asked, Stacy. It's not that hard." Jeffrey nodded from his chair, eyes glued to the TV. It burned, but I kept working, adjusting plans, hoping the wedding would finally change how they saw me. The night before the wedding, we sat at our family's dining table in Erie, the air heavy with tension. My mum had cooked her usual roast, but no one was eating. Brent leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, while Lindsay picked at her food. My dad sipped his wine, barely paying attention. I'd spent months planning this wedding, sinking $10,000 of my own savings into it. But that night felt different, like something was about to explode. I tried to brace myself, hoping it would stay quiet. Brent broke the silence. "Stacy, we need to upgrade the menu," he said without looking up. "Add lobster tails and that vintage champagne from Napa. Oh, and hire that photographer from Pittsburgh, the one who shot the governor's gala." I stared at him, my fork frozen mid-air. Lobster tails, champagne that cost $500 a bottle, a photographer charging $3,000 a day. I already knew. I couldn't do it. I'd already drained my savings to the breaking point, just covering half the cost of the wedding. "Brent, I can't," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my hands were shaking. "I've paid for everything already, the venue, the band, the flowers. There's nothing left." He let out a sharp laugh and tossed his phone onto the table. "You're always so cheap, Stacy. This is my wedding. Figure it out." Joyce slammed her glass down, her eyes narrowing at me. "He's right," she said. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime day. Why are you being so selfish?" Jeffrey finally looked up, his voice rough and dismissive. "Don't ruin this for your brother." My chest tightened. Their words cut deeper than I expected. I'd given them my time, my money, my energy, everything I had, and somehow I was still the problem. "I've spent $10,000 of my own savings," I tried to explain. "The budget is maxed out. Lobster and a celebrity photographer just aren't possible." Brent rolled his eyes and leaned toward Lindsay. "See? I told you she'd cheap out on us." Lindsay stayed quiet, staring at her plate. Joyce crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "You've always been like this, Stacy. You never step up when it actually matters." Jeffrey nodded along. "Brent deserves better than this half-hearted effort." Half-hearted, I'd worked late nights, negotiated every contract, and made their dream wedding possible. Yet to them, it meant nothing. I finally raised my voice. "I've paid for half this wedding. I've done everything you asked. I can't keep throwing money I don't have into this." Brent smirked and shook his head. "Then maybe you shouldn't be involved at all." Joyce leaned forward, her eyes ice cold. "You know what, Stacy? The greatest gift you can give your brother for his wedding is disappearing from this family forever." The room went dead quiet. Jeffrey didn't react. He just stared at his plate. Lindsay shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My heart was pounding, the word vanish echoing in my head like a slap. After everything I'd sacrificed, I wanted to scream, to list every sleepless night and every dollar I'd given up. But Joyce's glare, Jeffrey's indifference, and Brent's smug grin told me the truth. They'd chosen him, again. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly across the floor. "Fine," I said, my voice low but steady. "If that's what you want." I grabbed my purse, my keys rattling in my hand. "Don't make a scene, Stacy," Joyce called after me. I didn't respond. I walked out and slammed the door behind me. The sound was sharp and final. Outside, the cold, eerie air hit my face, but inside I was burning. I'd given them my savings, my time, and my hope, and they threw it back in my face. Sitting in my car, I gripped the steering wheel as my thoughts raced. They wanted me gone. Fine. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I'd spent months building their perfect day, only to be told I was the problem. I didn't know exactly what I'd do next, but one thing was clear. I was done being their doormat. I started the engine, my resolve hardening. Tomorrow, they'd find out what happened when I stopped carrying their weight. The next morning, I woke up with their words still ringing in my ears. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, my banking app open. $10,000, my entire nest egg, was tied up in wedding deposits, caterers, florists, the band. Every payment had come from my pocket. But after what they said the night before, everything had changed. I wasn't letting them walk over me anymore. I started calling vendors. First, the caterer. "Cancel the order," I said evenly. "I'm pulling the deposit." She hesitated, mentioning penalties, but I didn't care. Next was the florist. "No roses, no centerpieces. I want my payment refunded." The band was last. They'd already cashed my check, but I demanded a chargeback anyway. By noon, I'd recovered most of my $10,000. And the wedding? It was stripped bare. No flowers, no music, no food. I didn't feel guilty. I felt calm. They wanted me gone. I'd give them a wedding they'd never forget. By the afternoon, chaos exploded at the venue. Guests arrived to empty tables. There was no band playing, no bouquets anywhere in sight. Lindsay stood in her gown, frozen, as relatives whispered in confusion. Brent turned red, screaming at the venue staff who had no answers. Joyce left me a voicemail, her voice shrill. "Stacey, what have you done? You've ruined everything." Jeffrey left one too, his tone cold and final. "You're a disgrace to this family." I didn't call either of them back. Their accusations didn't shake me. I'd heard enough. That evening, Brent took to a local Erie message board that loved drama. "My sister sabotaged my wedding," he posted, his words dripping with anger. "She's jealous, spiteful, and ruined the best day of my life." He painted me as the villain, claiming I'd destroyed everything on purpose. The comments flooded in, neighbors I'd known for years calling me selfish, unstable, cruel. Joyce joined in, replying to his post. "She's always been trouble." Jeffrey didn't comment, but I knew where he stood. Their lies spread fast, twisting the truth to protect themselves. I sat there reading it all, knowing this wasn't over yet. I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through the posts, my stomach twisting with every line. Part of me wanted to jump in and tell the truth, how I'd paid for half their dream wedding, how they'd demanded more than I could ever give. But what would it change? They were never going to admit they were wrong. So instead, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments in Asheville, North Carolina. I'd been there once before and loved it. The quiet mountains, the calm pace, the promise of a clean slate. Erie didn't hold anything for me anymore, just a family that treated me like I was disposable. I called a realtor and asked about rentals. "Something small," I told her. "I'm starting over." That night, Nathan stopped by. His expression was serious the moment he walked in. "They're dragging you online," he said, showing me Brent's post on his phone. "You okay?" I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. "I'm done with them," I said. He didn't argue or push. He just stayed with me while I packed a few boxes, old books, my laptop, the basics. Before he left, he looked at me and said, "You're stronger than they know." Those words stuck with me. They became a small anchor in the middle of the storm. By midnight, I'd booked a one-way bus ticket to Asheville for the following week. Whatever happened to the wedding was on them. They'd pushed me past my limit. Joyce's voicemail replayed in my head, her voice blaming me for their embarrassment. Jeffrey's cold message followed, calling me a disgrace. Brent's post, full of lies, hurt the most. But I wasn't staying in Erie to fight their version of the story. I'd given them my money, my effort, and my hope. Now I was choosing myself. A few weeks later, I stood in my small Erie office, packing up the last of my things. Over the years, I'd built a modest freelance marketing business on the side. Nothing flashy, just enough to keep me afloat. The space was small, a rented room with a desk, a computer, and a handful of client files. But it was mine. I decided to sell it. A local agency offered me $25,000 for my client list and ongoing contracts. I signed the paperwork without hesitation, my hand steady as I put pen to paper. That money, combined with the $10,000 I'd pulled back from the wedding, was my ticket out. Then came the harder decision. For years, I'd poured myself into my family's grocery store, first through the marketing campaign that saved it, then through a $5,000 investment from my own savings to keep it running. I managed inventory, negotiated with suppliers, and kept the books balanced. After everything they'd done, I was finished. I called the bank and withdrew my entire investment, every last dollar. I didn't warn Joyce or Jeffrey. They'd made their choice the moment they told me to disappear. Without my money and management, the cracks I'd been patching for years were bound to split wide open. By the end of the month, I was on a bus headed to Asheville, North Carolina. Everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases, clothes, my laptop, and a few books. Outside the window, the mountains rose up, quiet and steady, pulling me forward. I rented a small apartment downtown. It wasn't fancy, just a 1-bedroom with a view of the Blue Ridge Peaks. That first night, I sat on the bare floor eating takeout, feeling lighter than I had in years. Erie was behind me. Joyce, Jeffrey, Brent, and all their venom were behind me too. The family store didn't last long after I left. Nathan texted me updates, keeping it blunt. Suppliers stopped delivering when payments stalled. Customers drifted away, turned off by empty shelves. Brent, who'd been handed control, fumbled decision after decision. Joyce tried stepping in, but she couldn't handle the logistics I'd managed for years. Jeffrey withdrew completely, blaming everyone but himself. Within weeks, the store filed for bankruptcy. The doors closed for good. Nathan sent one last message. "They're falling apart without you." I didn't reply. Their failure wasn't mine to carry anymore. In Asheville, I rebuilt my life from the ground up. I took on freelance marketing work, small jobs for local businesses, writing ads for coffee roasters and boutiques. The work was steady, and my skills were sharp after years of hustling. At first, I kept to myself, cautious around new people, but the city had a warmth that slowly pulled me in. One morning, I wandered into a downtown bakery, drawn by the smell of fresh bread. The owner, Shirley Bennett, greeted me with a wide smile. She was in her 50s, her apron dusted with flour, her laugh loud enough to fill the room. "You look new around here," she said, sliding a free scone across the counter. We started talking. I told her I'd just moved, leaving out the messy parts. She didn't pry. Instead, she shared her own story, how she'd opened the bakery after a divorce, rebuilding everything from scratch. "It takes guts to start over," she said, her eyes kind. She invited me to a local business meetup and introduced me to shop owners who needed marketing help. Thanks to her, I landed 2 new clients that same week. Shirley became part of my routine, morning coffee, easy conversations, her steady presence grounding me. I never heard from Joyce or Jeffrey again. Brent sent one angry email, accusing me of destroying the family business. "You're selfish," he wrote, like I hadn't kept it alive for years. I deleted it without responding. Lindsay stayed silent, probably stuck in Brent's orbit. I thought about what Nathan had told me back in Erie. "You're stronger than they know." He was right. In Asheville, I wasn't the shadow I used to be. I wasn't that person anymore, the one stuck back in Erie. I was building something new now, real clients, real connections, a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. One evening, Shirley invited me to stay after closing at the bakery. We sat at a small table with mugs of tea, the warm smell of cinnamon rolls still hanging in the air. She studied me for a moment and smiled. "You seem different," she said. As I settled back in my chair, I realized she was right. I hadn't thought about Erie in days. For the first time in my life, I felt unburdened, like I could breathe without carrying anyone else's expectations on my shoulders. Asheville was my fresh start, and with Shirley's help, I was finally finding where I fit. I wasn't looking back. Months passed, and Asheville became my sanctuary. Still, the fallout from Erie continued to ripple outward. The family grocery store, once the center of my parents' world, was gone. Its boarded-up windows became a quiet symbol of everything unraveling. Joyce and Jeffrey were forced into a harsh new reality. Their savings dried up, and they had to sell their house, moving into a cramped apartment on the edge of town. Neighbors who once smiled and waved now avoided eye contact, their reputations stained by the store's collapse. Brent didn't fare any better. His charm, which had always opened doors for him, couldn't hide his poor decisions anymore. He took a job at a hardware store, but customers whispered about his role in the family's downfall. His arrogance didn't carry the weight it once had. Lindsay drifted away too. Their engagement quietly dissolved under the strain. The life they'd built on borrowed glory crumbled piece by piece. I didn't dwell on any of it. Asheville was where my attention belonged. My freelance marketing business was taking root. I landed contracts with 5 local businesses: a brewery, a bookstore, an art gallery, a cafe, and a hiking gear shop. My days were full of designing logos, writing ad copy, and pitching campaign ideas over coffee in busy downtown cafes. I was bringing in about $3,000 a month, enough for my modest apartment, groceries, and the occasional treat, like a concert ticket or a new pair of hiking boots. Each project felt like laying another brick in the foundation of a life I was building for myself. Nathan stayed close, even from miles away. Every few weeks he'd call, his voice warm over the crackling line. "Erie's not the same without you," he joked once, "but you're killing it out there." He sent photos of his latest woodworking projects, small reminders that some connections didn't fade with distance. His encouragement reminded me of strength I'd forgotten I had. But Shirley was my anchor in Asheville. Her bakery, with its wooden tables and constant scent of fresh pastries, became my second home. I brainstormed ideas there, unwound after long days, and listened to her stories. She'd slide me a free muffin and say, "Fuel for the grind." Her belief in me, simple and steady, helped me see myself as more than the daughter who was never enough. Then Joyce's letter arrived. It showed up one crisp morning, her handwriting shaky across the envelope. She claimed she'd been diagnosed with a serious illness and begged me to come back to Erie to help her and Jeffrey rebuild. The words were heavy with guilt, painting me as their only hope. I read it twice, my stomach tightening. Shirley noticed my face right away. She wiped down the counter and asked what was wrong. I handed her the letter. She skimmed it, frowned, and set it aside. "This smells like manipulation," she said flatly. "People don't change overnight." Her blunt honesty snapped me out of my doubt. I'd seen Joyce use pity like this before. When I called Nathan, he didn't hesitate either. "She's trying to pull you back in," he said. "Don't fall for it." I didn't. I wrote a single response, short and final. "I wish you well, but I'm not coming back." I mailed it, then blocked their numbers. Cutting them off wasn't easy. A part of me still ached for the family I'd always wanted them to be. But I knew that staying tied to their chaos would slowly erase the peace I'd fought so hard to build. When I told Shirley, she nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "You're choosing you," she said, pouring me coffee. "That's the hardest and bravest thing there is." Nathan echoed her words during our next call. "You're free now," he said. "Don't look back." Their support, real and steady, gave me the courage to finally let go. In Asheville, I was building more than a career. I joined a local hiking group and explored trails like Black Balsam Knob, where the mountains stretched wide and endless. I picked up painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned in Erie, filling sketchbooks with watercolor landscapes. My apartment slowly became a home. Plants on the windowsill, a rug from a local market, shelves of books I actually had time to read. Then I landed a major contract with a regional tourism board, a 6-month campaign that doubled my income. The work was demanding, but every late night spent refining ideas felt like proof of my worth. One evening at Shirley's bakery, I sat with her and a few regulars, laughing about Asheville's quirky festivals. A client stopped by to thank me for a campaign that boosted his shop's foot traffic. I smiled, warmth spreading through me, something I'd never felt back in Erie. That's when it fully clicked. My value was never tied to what I did for Joyce, Jeffrey, or Brent. It lived in the life I was creating. In the clients who trusted me, in the friends who lifted me up, in the quiet moments where I finally felt whole. Asheville wasn't just a fresh start. It was where I learned to stand tall, not for anyone else, but for myself.